Welcome back to DataCube's online training course. This episode is episode 2 and your host for the day is again myself, Matt Dent. I hope you enjoyed episode 1 from last week where we spoke about what is Power BI, how can I get it, connecting to some simple data and building our very first visual. If you haven't already seen that episode, go and check it out in our channel. This week we're going to be speaking about chart selection, the importance of it, and which chart is useful for which different type of data you have. We're going to concentrate on Power BI's standard visuals that come preloaded into Microsoft Power BI. But later in the series, we're going to move on to some of our favorite custom visuals that other people have created. Start episode 2 where we left off last week. This is our workbook from last week, as I'm sure you remember. But the eagle-eyed amongst you may notice that our value and our sales by product have jumped up considerably. So let's take a quick look at the data. Now you can do that if you follow my mouse over here and click on the data tab. If you select any one of the fields from your grocery shop table or whatever the table name's called, you'll be able to see your data. Now last week we only had 1 day's worth of data, which took us up to the 1st of January, split by these 20 different products that we sell in our grocery shop. Now if you scroll down, or if I scroll down, you'll see we've got 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th and 7th, so 7 days worth of data. And that's why our values and sales have jumped up, because we're now looking at a week's worth of data instead of days worth of data. So now over the course of a week I've sold coming up to £1,200 worth of spinach, over £1,000 of cauliflower, over £1,000 of beetroot. Now this episode is all about chart selection, so let's talk about what we have already and just concentrate on one of these charts. I'm going to click on sales and press delete and delete that chart, so we can just concentrate on having one. So I'm going to make this a tiny bit smaller, like this, pop it in the middle of the workbook. Now, what we have here is comparative data. We are comparing our different products by value. But what we made last week was purposefully not the best chart for this data, just so we can change it now. Later in the series we're going to be speaking about design, and one of the key principles that we're going to talk about is not to have to rotate your head. In this, we can see our labels here are on a sort of 45-degree angle, which is less than ideal. So what we actually want to be doing is creating this horizontally. Now we don't have to rotate our head to be able to view this chart. Last week we also touched on sorting, so we did that by clicking on the 3 dots up here and sorting by whatever it was, whether if it's by the product or by value, but let's do it by descending so that we have our highest earners at the top, so our spinach and our beetroot, going all the way down to broccoli and potato at the bottom. Now you may have noticed there's additional options within these visuals, so we've got axis and value populated, but there's also something like legend. So if I delete this one for now so we can just focus on one chart, I'm going to drag that back into the middle. What I want to do is add an additional dimension into our chart. So I'm going to, instead of have the axis by product, I am going to have the axes by date. Now a lot of dates automatically use a date hierarchy, so here you can see it's put a hierarchy of year, quarter, month and day, which allows us to do what is called a drill down functionality, which we'll get to later in the series. But for now I want to remove this hierarchy, so I'm going to click on the small arrow over here, which gives me some additional options, and I'm going to just select date. Now we can now see the value split by our different days, so we can see the 6th of January was our highest value day at £2,610 there, with the 7th of January having the lowest value income. Now we still want to have this split by product, So I'm going to show you how this visual has additional functionality. So if I put product into legend, we can now see how or how important each different product was on each day. Now at the moment we've kept this on our stat bar chart by horizontal. There's also vertical functionality, which will look like this, and this probably works better because although we've got comparative data set, we're also looking at this over time. Now our other option here is to use a clustered bar chart, which instead of stacking the bars on top of each other like this, it shows them all split out individually. Now this is better for comparing the size of each factor. So each product here, we can see the sort of line yellow here was probably the highest grossing. So if we were to move our legend along, we'd be able to see what grocery that was. So if we kept going, we can see that that's spinach, which we'll also be able to find out if we were to hover over. So you have the options here to be able to stack your bars or split them by the clustering, and again that can be done horizontally or vertically. Now another option to do is to look at proportions. So here our 6th of January, it shows our total income coming up over to the 2,500 mark. And we can hover over each of the different categories to see which how much value each of those different categories had. But if we want to know this as a proportion, we can use the final two visuals on the top line, which are called 100% stacked bars. So the first one stays as a horizontal, and now we can see that as a proportion. Now the proportion, because I've kept the values the same for each day, they look uniform. So we know that beetroot was just under 10% of the total value, same as cauliflower because they had the same value. We know spinach was our biggest, so if we click on that, we can see that that was 11.11%, and that value for that day was £67. We know on the 6th of January we sold a lot of spinach, so the proportion stayed similar at 11%, but the value has gone up to £288. Now if we wanted to pivot the axis like we have been doing between horizontal and vertical, we could click on the next standard visual, which is 100% stacked column chart, and that will flip it around the other way. Now to make this visual easier to understand, I'm going to simultaneously use another visual on this sheet. And the one I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down here to slicer. So if I click on slicer, I'm going to add product into field. Now this slicer enables me to only select or deselect the products that I'm interested in doing. Now there's quite a lot of options for these slicers. The first thing I'm going to do is click on the format pane and click on selection controls. From here I'm going to untick multi-select with control and show a select all option. So now if I select all the products will be seen in the chart. If I deselect that, we'll start from the beginning. So if I'm only interested in aubergine, beetroot, broccoli, we know spinach was a high earner, and potentially kidney beans. So now we've only got 5 products, and it makes the chart a lot easier to understand. So if I go back to the start and start with the first visuals we looked at for the first chart, we can now change what this looks like based on our selection with the slicer. Now this slicer has taken a lot of space, so I'm going to click on the little down arrow here and change that to a drop down and just make this a bit smaller. So now our slicer is taking up a lot less space. I'm just going to stick it up in the top corner, but allows us to still select or deselect what products we want. So if I do those 5 again, kidney beans. There's our 5 products that we're interested in for this purpose, and again we can just change what charts we want to be looking at. Now at this last stage I added in dates as the axes, split by product as the legend. Now as this is over time, this is commonly referred to as change over time. It displays measures that are changing over a trend. So most commonly a bar chart is less effective than if we were to use a line chart, and that is where we're going next. So if we click on line chart, we can now see how each of those products are changing over time, split by the different products in legend. Again, if we weren't interested in products, then we could take product off the legend and it would just give our overall trend. So we know that our sales data was ramping up and peaked at the 6th of January before plummeting on the 7th. But I'm interested in product, and we can see that because I kept the ratios the same, we can see that each product tracks that same trend. The next visualization is an area chart, which is similar to a line chart, however gives each line an area from its value all the way down to the bottom of the axes. Now this is good for showing things that build up over time. However, when your categories change order, so for example if spinach was our greatest sales, but it swapped over with beetroot, then on a line chart that would be really easy to see. However, in an area chart you lose sight of that. Now similarly to the bar charts that we looked at above, we can also stack our areas. So here we are now stacking each of the products on top of each other. So here we can see each of those products in turn. So spinach on the 6th, hit £288, and that's where it sits on the axes. Now if we stack and add our products together, it is actually adding those values together. So we know if we have aubergine plus beetroot plus broccoli plus kidney beans plus spinach, on the 6th that totaled to around £750, and you can see that on the chart here. So if I were to take away, using my slicer, take away spinach, you can see our total is now at around £450. So this is a really good chart to use at how things are changing over time as lines, but because it's an area stacked, we can see how those are cumulatively adding together. Next up on the visualization pane is the line and stack column chart. These are what traditionally would in Excel be called combo charts. So if we keep our data in that shape and we click on the the line and stack column chart, we can see we get additional filled entry in here, which is line values. So what we can do is add in some more data. So let's say we just wanted to look at our value and our sales over time. We could have value as our data and sales as our line. Let me just make that a bit clearer so we know which is which. If we just make that a sort of pinky colour, so we can see sales in pink is the line and value is the bar here. So we can see how they sort of interact together and how they may change over time. Now as sales have gone up, as has value, and when sales dropped off, as did the value there. So we can see how they are working together. Now we can also add in a column series, so that's where we're going to bring product back in, and that will split our dimensions by that product again. Next up is similar to before, where we had the difference between a regular bar chart, like here. If I just take sales off to keep it simple, So we're just looking at value again. So the difference between a stacked bar and a clustered bar. So if I add product in to the legend, so we can split our products down, we can see how they're stacked there, or where they're side by side. We can do that the same with the line chart. So if I wanted to add sales in here as a line, we can do that, and it will add that as a further dimension. So whereas the bars are stacked there, the bars are side by side here. Now the last visual I want to talk about today, to break this down, is the ribbon chart. Now this is one of my favourites. So if we click on ribbon here, so if I remove sales there from the tooltip, so it works a bit like the area chart. So if I go back to that, you can see how that's quite similar. Obviously it sort of curves out those lines a bit more. Now it's a stacked chart, a bit like the area chart, so we can see our values add up to a similar amount. However, it works more like a line chart. So for example, if we've got here spinach being our biggest value, if beetroot here were to become a higher value than spinach at any one point, the blue ribbon can overtake the sort of yellowy browny colour of the spinach here. So your ribbons can interlace. However, they can still add up to your total, which is a really sort of unique chart, and it visually looks really nice. So far we've spoken mainly about having comparative charts, being able to compare different, in this example, different products over time, or by value, or by sales. And we've also looked at how we can visualize that changing over time. I also want to be speaking about how to use ranking, and also spatial and flow. So spatial is thinking geographically, so maps, and flow is how things can change and interact with each other. We've also looked at using filter to sort of filter out exactly what we want to be seeing. We're using one filter here, but of course you can use multiple filters to interact with your visuals. So that's going to wrap up this week's session. So next week we're going to sort of do a part 2 onto choosing your visuals and how important that is to represent the type of data you're looking at. So next week tune in, because we're mainly going to be talking about spatial, so mapping, and also flow charts. So yeah, if you enjoyed our video today, give us a like, give us a subscribe to the channel, and be sure to tune in next week to talk about part 2 of the importance of choosing the right visual.